The lights cut out. A painted galaxy ceiling crumbles like dust, while blue and red-tagged players tear through pockets of darkness and neon. A newborn's first cry rips open the silence like a flare splitting night woods. Smash cut. Jihoon, eyes wild, crushing Daeho's throat. Hunter and prey swapping roles in a single heartbeat. Starlight and blood suspended mid-air. You barely have time to inhale before Squid Game Season 3, Episode 2, The Starry Night, drags you into its killing maze. Hide and seek on paper, open season and practice. Blue players hide for 30 minutes, red players hunt with knives, knowing they'll be shot if no one bleeds. Freedom depends on assembling 3 mismatched keys to crack the lone exit, an alley so tight it gulps 35 bodies before the whistle even fades. With a candy-bright star chart overhead and mangled friends underfoot, creator Hwang Dong-hyuk dares a brutal question: can maternal instinct trump a system built on violence? In the same corridor, a newborn's fragile wail collides with a mother's desperate knife, forcing us to wonder if conscience is just the game's softest prop. Stranger still is the setup. The 10,000-square-foot astral labyrinth wasn't in the early drafts. It was a last-minute escalation. Who greenlit a budget-busting upgrade that turned simple hide-and-seek into a multi-dimensional blood lab? Rumor says Lee Jung-jae didn't see the final boards until 3 days before shooting. Why risk more than half the season's budget on a single 30-minute game? The cracks in that painted sky are holding answers, ones we're about to pry loose. The third season writer's room started with a dusty childhood notebook Hwang Dong-hyuk kept on his shelf, pages filled with crude constellations and rules for an after-dark hide-and-seek game he and his cousins played when their parents thought they were asleep. That throwaway memory turned into the star-mapped ceiling we just watched shatter, but it almost never made it past the pitchboard. Netflix first greenlit a stripped-down courtyard chase. Only after Seoul eased its strictest pandemic rules did the production team lobby for a full indoor build, arguing that the echo of boots on concrete would sell the dread better than any VFX thunderclap. Hwang agreed, then doubled down by ordering 2 extra sound stages, which ballooned the set to a 10,000-square-foot labyrinth and punched the budget past the midpoint of the entire season. That gamble put everyone on a clock. Art director Chae Kyung-sun's crew painted the galaxy ceiling by hand in 4 13-hour night shifts, using glow pigments that only fully cured under UV lamps borrowed from a K-pop tour rehearsal. When condensation from the maze's fog machines started peeling the constellations, the team rewrote blocking so actors would slam into walls exactly where the paint had bubbled, turning an accident into a visual cue that the sky is literally falling on the players. Casting shook up almost as violently. Jo Yoo-ri signed on to play Joon-hee 2 weeks before her first scene and spent that time shadowing midwives at Seoul National University Hospital so the birth on set would read as more than shock value. Meanwhile, veteran Kang A-yim, cast as Byum-ja, requested an antique silver hairpin from her own stage collection. She believed a mother stabbing her son with a cheap plastic prop would feel hollow. The prop master overnighted the pin to props for a stress test, and it snapped on the first take. What you see in the final cut is the hastily soldered backup, the fracture still visible in a single 3-frame glint. The episode's emotional hinge, Jihoon crushing Daeho's throat, wasn't in the earliest draft. Original pages had Daeho begging Goohin to kill him to spare others, a moment of mercy that let viewers breathe between kills. 2 table reads later, Hwang scrapped the compassion. He'd reread Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground and decided that Jihoon needed to choose violence unprompted, or the audience never believes anyone can become the system they hate. Actors Lee Jung-jae and Kang Ha-neul rehearsed the strangling scene privately in a padded gym, trying to locate the point where shame flips to adrenaline. On shoot day, Lee's grip marks lasted through lunch. Kang's windpipe mic captured a real gag that the sound editor kept because it felt like truth leaking through latex. Even the newborn's cry, the episode's heartbeat, was nearly replaced by stock audio. The child actor's guardian balked at the cold maze temperatures, so the team rushed in portable heaters, which warped the floor vinyl just enough that a dolly shot now rides a subtle wave. Rather than reshoot, cinematographer Lee Hyung-duk leaned into the bob, saying it matches a mother's unsteady breathing. If you felt seasick watching blood pool under starlight, that sway is to blame. And about that labyrinth's late addition, insiders whisper it came from a single studio note: push the franchise past meme status. The maze forced the crew to choreograph 35 deaths and continuous takes, a technical nightmare that turned into a flex. Editors stitched the chaos with just 9 visible cuts, a sly nod to Alfonso Cuarón's long-take bravado. By the time Netflix ran the first test screening, executives who'd questioned the expense were bragging about the most claustrophobic half-hour of television in 2025. Whether that boast ages well or curdles into hubris will depend on how the season sticks the landing, but the scars, on budgets, walls, and actors' throats, are already real. Cameras glide along the labyrinth's low-ceilinged arteries like a drone tracing capillaries, then tilt up to that glittering sky, forcing the audience to hold 2 contradictory scales in mind: a body-sized hallway and a cosmos too vast to fathom. Director Hwang shoots key confrontations at a Dutch angle so severe the hand-painted constellations resemble constellations sliding off a globe, warping our sense of gravity just as the game warps every moral compass inside it. When Hyunju fights off 2 red tag hunters, the lens switches from a 35mm to a 14mm fisheye in mid-swing, the moment his knife arcs across frame. The shift inflates his arms to comic book proportions, then snaps back, highlighting how heroism in this maze is as fleeting and distorted as a funhouse mirror. Color coding goes beyond the obvious blue versus red jerseys. Production designer Chae Kyung-sun tints each key type with a different wavelength: cyan, magenta, and a sickly chartreuse that wobbles between safety exit green and hazard yellow. Under blacklight strobes, those keys scatter boast hues across sweating faces, so whatever symbol a player clutches stains their skin like moral ink. Junhee's magenta key flickers against her blood-slicked hands during labor, framing motherhood not as rosy instinct, but as a warning flare that paints both walls and conscience the same alarming shade. Hyunju's dying gasp bathes in cyan, a color linked to Korean mourning cloth, hinting that sacrifice here is always threaded through cultural memory, no matter how futuristic the set dressing looks. Much of the episode's tension rides on characters who seem peripheral at first glance. Kimja's frail posture invites easy dismissal until her silver hairpin flashes like a switchblade. Every time she straightens that pin, the camera dolly inches closer, as though respect must be physically earned in micro-movements. Her ultimate act, the stab that ends her son's rampage, is filmed with a locked-off tripod, no zoom, no music, letting the gesture sit in real time so the audience can decide whether it's mercy or murder. By contrast, Myung-gi and Namgyu, who rack up kills for cash, never get a shot longer than 2 seconds. Their whole existence is a cutaway, suggesting that opportunistic violence blurs into montage fodder the instant it surfaces. Hidden symbols pile up if you know where to stare. The star map reproduces an 18th century Joseon dynasty chart that positions the Great Bear, Korea's royal emblem, directly above the maze's exit. Yet when the keyhole finally springs, the ceiling's projected sky reveals the constellation flipped upside down, a subtle iconoclasm implying that any hierarchy, even one steeped in cultural pride, can be overturned and gamified. The guard tower motif borrows from torii gates in Shinto shrines, lacquered a cartoonish red. Every elimination replays under these pseudo-sacred arches, turning spiritual thresholds into kill counters. And the spiral ductwork snaking through the walls echoes the Fibonacci coil, a natural growth pattern distorted here into a conveyor for corpses. The season's quiet thesis that progress in a rigged system is just mathematics weaponized against hope. The episode also leverages déjà vu against the viewer. Gi-hoon's hand tremor right before he strangles Dae-ho mirrors his tic from Season 1's honeycomb game, but Hwang photographs it in reverse. Now the camera starts tight, then juts backward in a staccato dolly, as if the violence radiates outward instead of coiling inward. That reversal underlines how trauma mutates. The past doesn't repeat, it metastasizes. Even the newborn cry, captured on a boom shielded by makeshift foam because heaters warped the vinyl, echoes the marble drop sound effect used when contestants died in the first season. On a subliminal track, it tells us the newborn might be nothing more than a future. Time folds in on itself even before the first key turns. The edit keeps jumping from the newborn's corridor to Ji-han's hunt, but the sound mix carries the baby's heartbeat under both threads. That bleed tricks the brain into reading two simultaneous presents, so every cut feels like déjà vu instead of progression. Hong tried a straight linear pass in rough assembly and junked it within a day. The moral recoil came too late. By staggering the timelines, he lets mercy and brutality occupy the same second, proving that any ethical high ground collapses the moment survival clocks in. When Junhee reaches for her magenta key, the soundtrack hard cuts to Jihan's fingers closing on Jaeho's throat, a match-action splice that rewires cause and effect. The audience starts to believe a birth can trigger a murder, as if hope itself forces the system to balance its books. Hong has played this shell game before, but never this surgically. In Silenced, he cross-cut courtroom testimony with flashback abuse to spark outrage. Here, he cross-breeds empathy and revulsion so tightly the distinction blurs. He also flips his hallmark slow-zoom motif. Earlier seasons and Parasite, which he produced, slip the camera forward whenever characters grasped power. This episode yanks the lens back at every pivotal choice, implying agency is an illusion that recedes the second you reach for it. The reversal lands hardest when Gum just stabs her son, no dolly creep, just an abrupt half-meter retreat that forces viewers to watch from the emotional cheap seats, exactly the distance society keeps from elder guilt. Some scholars hail that scene as the franchise's moral apex. Others accuse it of weaponizing aged female suffering for shock clicks. Seoul Film Quarterly published dueling essays within a week of release. One argues Gumja's act subverts Confucian filial piety, exposing how duty morphs into violence under capital logic. The rebuttal says the show cheapens matriarchal sacrifice, reducing it to clickbait tragedy with no structural critique. Hong's team claims both misses the point, that the pin's fracture, still visible in a three-frame glint, is the real thesis. Even symbols of generational continuity snap under market pressure. Whether that metaphor holds or merely patches a prop failure is still fueling TikTok dissertations. The episode's tangled chronology also borrows from Korean pansori rhythm, an art form that alternates driving narration with sudden melismatic stretches. Editor Yang Jin-mo mapped the cuts to a simplified pansori beat cycle, tong, tuk, and dung, so quiet dread, tong, always precedes violent splash, tuk, followed by a hollow ring that leaves the frame hanging an extra half-second. It's why every kill feels like a drumhead tightening, then tearing, then vibrating in sick resonance. Western viewers may not clock the pattern consciously, but the body processes the micro-rests as anticipatory panic, the same somatic tremor that string sections exploit in horror scores. Critics hunting for narrative loopholes point at the key mechanic. Why design three shapes if only one exit exists? Hong dodges the logic trap by making the shapes all negative spaces, holes, not solids, so the keys literally remove matter instead of adding it. It's a nod to Michelangelo's claim he freed statues by carving away stone, except here the carving releases nothing but flightless contestants. Academic blogs split on whether that inversion is genius or an over-clever patch for a game that otherwise lacks player agency. Either way, the moment the final chartreuse key clicks, the lock ejects half its tumblers into the corridor like shell casings, punctuating the idea that liberation in this universe always fires back. Layered beneath the structural gamesmanship is a conversation with Park Chin-wook's old boy. Both stories hinge on corridors, both swap paternal vengeance for something messier. Park's hammer hallway becomes Hong's star corridor, traded rage for institutional cruelty. In interviews, Park praised the episode's asterism mise-en-scène, yet wondered aloud if the sky painting overcodes the metaphor, turning viewers into puzzle hunters instead of moral witnesses. Hong answered by posting a behind-the-scenes still of blank ceiling panels, captioned, "Meaning is the hole you fall through," a bait-and-switch worthy of Park himself. What finally seals the episode's structural audacity is its refusal to land a catharsis beat. Traditional three-act pacing would deploy respite after the maze unlocks. Hong instead cuts to black one frame before the surviving players glimpse the next set. No establishing shot, no promise of scale, just a blackout that feels like the viewfinder's battery dying. Some call it cheap suspense, others read it as a meta-gag on binge culture, a flipped bird to anyone expecting meat buffers between trauma servings. Wherever you stand, that missing frame echoes long after credits roll, a void shaped exactly like whatever relief the show insists you won't get. Compressed into a single blood-soaked hallway is 70 years of South Korean acceleration, the sprint from post-war rubble to export powerhouse, from communal rice paddies to neoliberal Hunger Games. The maze borrows its right-angle turns from 1970s factory corridors at Guro Industrial Complex, where workers labored under fluorescent skies they called fake daylight. Those real corridors bred a culture of clock-punch obedience that the show literalizes. A whistle, a 30-minute quota, bonuses for overproduction, only now the quota is bodies, the bonus a swelling jackpot. Players scurry like shift laborers racing a line speed they can't set, except the foremen here carry rifles instead of clipboards. In that sense, the episode isn't inventing cruelty, it's just repainting the fluorescent bulbs as constellations and asking if nostalgia can mask the hum of exploitation. Hyunju, the ex-Navy medic, smuggles that industrial rhythm in his muscle memory. Every turn he makes is a left then count to 2, the same sweep he used below decks when drills timed how fast sailors could reach a flooding compartment. Junhee, the gig economy courier, hugs walls the way food delivery cyclists trace alleys to shave seconds off promise windows. Gumja keeps checking the ceiling like a grandmother tracking laundry drying on a rooftop, measuring weather by looking up rather than out. None of them move randomly. The show programs each route with the habits capitalism already coded into their bodies. So when violence erupts, it feels like the logical next step in a workflow diagram. The real antagonist isn't frontman, but a biomechanical reflex. Obey the bell, meet the metric, outsource the moral math. That reflex detonates the central paradox. Every choice pretends to be personal, yet is engineered to funnel toward the same outcome, debt paid in flesh. Gihan's strangling of Daeho looks spontaneous, but the edit slips in a 2-frame flash of the scoreboard showing his own kill count at 0. The system writes his motive in lights large enough for a stadium, and he still convinces himself it's vengeance. Likewise, Junhee's decision to push through labor instead of waiting for medics reroutes maternal instinct into workforce logic. Finish the task before the siren. The game's genius isn't rules, it's plausible deniability, letting players stitch their own alibis so neatly they never see the seam where autonomy ends and algorithm begins. At a deeper register, the maze stages Korea's generational fracture. Gumja, born under authoritarian rule, will stab her son rather than see him disgrace her mantra of die clean. Young-sik, raised on influencer hustle, seeks clout by live-streaming kills over his helmet cam. Blink and you'll notice a GoPro-style lens grafted to his visor. Their collision rewrites filial piety as a zero-sum ledger. If the son's survival profits the system, the mother must become sabotage incarnate or lose all meaning inside it. That split mirrors household debt statistics, showing elders co-signing loans that trap their adult children. The pin through Yongsik's chest is just a sharpened balance sheet. The newborn amplifies that ledger into the future tense. Wrapped in a blanket dyed the same cyan that washes Hyunju's death scene, the baby inherits mourning even before first light. In Korean folklore, babies born under a falling star were thought to carry the unfinished business of the dead. Here, the star ceiling literally sheds as the child arrives, dusting her head with flakes of paint like a cursed baptism. The implication is brutal. The next generation won't just inherit debt and trauma, it will be branded by the spectacle that created them, drafted as both mascot and hostage for the next rating cycle. The key's negative space design drives the allegory further. They don't fill locks, they remove obstacles, echoing the way deregulation frames subtraction of labor rights, of social safety nets, as the gateway to freedom. Each turn of a hollow key takes something away: structural integrity in the lock, moral friction in the soul. When the final chartreuse key clicks, tumblers eject like spent cartridges, demonstrating how every liberation delivered by markets fires shrapnel into someone unseen. That moment tunnels Michelangelo's carving metaphor through a neoliberal prism. In freeing David, the sculptor destroyed marble, and in freeing themselves, the players destroy each other. Historical ghosts whisper through the sound design too. The beating frequency between the baby's cry and the guard siren. City sirens at rush hour already feel like the episode's heartbeat. The only difference is that here in Los Angeles, the maze looks like freeway overpasses and vanishing pension plans. When the show's whistle blows, it isn't time-coded fiction. It syncs with the push notification that your rent just auto-drafted, the one that leaves 3 keys jangling in your head: paycheck, side gig, credit line. Missing even one shape locks the exit, so you sprint harder on the same concrete, eyes on the same fake constellations painted by billboards promising flexible freedom. The series is too on the nose for satire because the lens is pointed straight at the gig economy's daily hide-and-seek: outrun the debt or get hunted by interest rates that climb like red tag players with knives. Researchers at Seoul National and UCLA logged a 28% spike in anxiety keywords on Twitter within 12 hours of the premiere. They traced usage back to neighborhoods with the highest rideshare density, as if algorithmic shift rot had suddenly broken the fourth wall. Policy wonks argue the maze exaggerates precarity, but bankruptcy courts tell a quieter story. In the month after Episode 2 dropped in Korea, filings citing unsecured revolving credit jumped 11%, and case notes mentioned Squid Game memes as shorthand for the debtor's mindset: stay hidden, pay later, hope not to meet the knife. The show doesn't cause insolvency. It hands language to describe a stress that was already vibrating under the floorboards. That sharp vocabulary can cut 2 ways. On one hand, teachers report teens using Blue Tag Day to label any school morning that feels like a survival round, normalizing dread the way earlier generations shrugged at pop quizzes. On the other, community organizers have adopted the same meme for crowd-sourced debt relief drives. Local co-ops in Busan and Oakland now host key swaps, flipping the episode's mechanic by pooling 3 small donations into 1 delinquent payment, turning hollow shapes into filled stomachs. Fiction bleeds into praxis at the speed of an upload. That cross-pollination raises the question of systemic fixes. Korea's ruling coalition floated a squid clause exploring debt jubilee pilots for under 30 borrowers, only to see pundits mock the plan as subsidizing Netflix fandom. Yet, buried in the noise is a hard statistic. Nations that capped payday loan APRs below 30% saw suicide rates linked to personal debt drop almost 15% over 5 years. If the series magnifies pain, it also makes the math public. Once you see 35 corpses stack in half an hour, compound interest feels less abstract. Real reform may hinge on translating that visceral image into policy papers before the timeline refreshes and the meme economy moves on. The episode's mother and child axis carries its own real-world shadow. Obstetric wards in Seoul and San Francisco logged temporary visitor surges from expectant parents wanting skin-to-skin rooms after binge-watching, a ripple effect midwives call trauma prophylaxis. At the same time, domestic violence helplines flagged a curious spike. Callers referenced Gimja's pin as shorthand for being forced to choose lesser harms at home. The show's moral choke points nudge viewers to articulate compromises they've normalized. Every plate glass scream on screen echoes in a living room where a wage earner wonders if overtime means missing bedtime or missing mortgage. Social workers now teach a 3-key check-in where clients list resources they can unlock before crisis: neighbor, union rep, emergency fund, mirroring the maze exit but without body count. Therapy sessions borrow the narrative because stories outmuscle statistics when panic rises. Solutions, though, can't rely on borrowed metaphors alone. Urban planning think tanks propose redesigning public space to unmaze the city. More diagonal crosswalks, fewer dead-end alleys, streetlights shaped to mimic dawn instead of harsh neon. It sounds cosmetic until you map crime data and see how labyrinthine housing projects funnel aggression the way the show funnels players toward knives. When researchers piloted open sightline blocks in Busan's Yongdo district, assaults dropped 22% in a quarter. Architecture unwinds violence long before ethics class tries. Yet, funding drags because developers profit from jammed corridors. The layout keeps retail on-time foot traffic high. The show sneers at that calculus with its star-blotted skies, but in real zoning meetings, the neon still buys votes. Individual resilience remains the frontline defense, and the episode gifts an unlikely toolkit. Trauma psychologists notice viewers remixing the heartbeat siren dissonance into ambient study playlists, not to relive dread, but to desensitize their fight-or-flight signals and reclaim control. It's exposure therapy hacked from pop culture. Loop the anxiety until the mind files it under background noise, freeing bandwidth for real emergencies. Meanwhile, mutual aid groups host key carve workshops, teaching 3D printing basics so neighbors can fab utility hooks, not blades, turning negative space design into productive subtraction. The same holo silhouette that unlocked a kill zone can now suspend a hanging plant in a cramped studio, tiny architecture of defiance. Hope sneaks in through even smaller apertures. Parents who feared the newborn's painted dust christening started mailing peel-off glow star stickers to maternity wards, repainting safer constellations on ceilings that once flickered with harsh LEDs. Nurses call the project Reverse Starry Night. The gesture won't erase wage inequality or algorithmic debt, but swaps dread iconography for gentle navigation, teaching infants a sky unwarped by profit margins. In that quiet redecorating lies the episode's inadvertent lesson. Systems may script corridors of cruelty, yet ceilings remain canvases where communities can replot their own maps. The firmament bends faster than a ledger updates. Fan edits hit the web before sunrise. TikTok loops that replace each maze death with vintage anime impact frames, Instagram filters that swap your ceiling light for the crumbling star map, and Discord bots that auto-assign cyan, magenta, or chartreuse key roles to new users, so moderation feels like a game of survival. Within a week, the hashtag #NegativeKeyLife clips 600 million views, most posted by accounts that weren't following any Squid Game tag the week before. The show's hollow key silhouette now works like the Guy Fawkes mask once did, an all-purpose signifier of grievance, except this time the shape signals leverage, an invitation to carve out whatever barrier sits between you and the next gig payout. That malleability explains why the same icon shows up on cafe tip jars in Hongdae and on protest banners outside Amazon's JFK 8 warehouse in New York. Memes metastasize to commerce at light speed. Street vendors in Hongdae sell 3D printed keys as stress toys. Etsy shops ship star map projector lamps pitched as therapy for late-stage capitalism insomnia, and a Chicago sneaker brand drops limited edition chartreuse exit high tops whose soles leave spiral ductwork patterns in wet pavement. Most of the money never reaches Netflix, but the platform still wins because every tagged unboxing video feeds the algorithm fresh SEO bait. The loop is perfect. Critique commodifies, commodification drives critique. Both raise stream count. Sociologists at Yonsei label it dissent monetization, a flywheel where even negative sentiment adds ad impressions. When political analysts find protest tweets spiking 2 hours after each ad-supported replay, they joke the revolution will be televised and pre-rolled. Academia jumps aboard. UCLA's Media Studies Department opens a pop-up course called Constellation Capital, dissecting the episode's star ceiling as an allegory for labor metrics gamification. Seoul National's Psychology Lab sets up VR recreations of the maze to test decision fatigue. Preliminary data show subjects exposed to the baby cry siren binaural mix make riskier financial choices for 48 hours. One paper even links the episode's 7 Hz infrasonic beat to historic crowd control tech, arguing that the show subliminally rehearses viewers for future civil order tactics. Peer reviewers laugh until EEG readouts start echoing the claim. The series becomes a Rorschach blot for every discipline: media theory, behavioral econ, and acoustic neurology. Each citation pushes the maze deeper into cultural infrastructure until it feels less like a TV set and more like a public utility with bloodstains. Fandom culture rubber bands between homage and metamorphosis. AO3 hosts crossover fiction where the newborn grows into a cyberpunk Robin Hood, hacking next season's game code. Roblox modders release a kid-safe clone that swaps knives for sticker guns but keeps the 3-key exit, quietly teaching 8-year-olds the shape of algorithmic scarcity. Stage troops mount fringe musicals scored entirely with sampled baby heartbeats. Merch tables sell Pin of Destiny brooches shaped like Gimja's hairpin, accompanied by zines debating whether her act was